Hello, and welcome to the second installment of Stats Chat with me, Z for Carlo, the creator of A Song of Ice and Fire Stats, where I will try and put together a short review of all the submissions and interesting trends that we've seen in the last week. If you tuned into the first episode, I gave more background information on where we were at in general with the meta. But today, hopefully, will be a bit quicker, a bit snappier, and we'll just talk about what changes we see, and we'll highlight, as usual, what those big winners this week are, and who our biggest losers are, and who you maybe should think about avoiding. Starting with the faction power rankings, we can see that there have been a few changes. As predicted last week, we have finally seen the Baratheons pull themselves off this bottom spot, and they have opened up quite a significant margin from where the Targaryens currently sit at minus 61. Throughout the week, we have seen Night's Watch, Neutral, and Lannisters be quite interchangeable in their positions, and they have swapped between that third, fourth, and fifth slot throughout the week. I am surprised to see how far the Baratheons have risen. They were very slowly gaining momentum, but they have really burst past the Targaryens. They were both sat at about minus 50 just 1 week ago, but now the Baratheons are really within striking distance of the Night's Watch, Neutrals, and Lannisters in terms of what their kind of ability to compete with these factions is considered to be. And I think that given one more week, we may see the Baratheons catapult themselves right past the whole set of three into third place, if they can continue their current rate of kind of growth and expansion, their current rate of gain, because they have had quite a good week. At the top end of the table, we've seen the Starks continue to close that gap on the Free Folk, and they've now started to open up a gap away from the Night's Watch, Neutrals, and Lannisters. They're now up at 36 points, plus 36, of course. Roughly half of the Free Folks plus 70. And the Free Folk have taken a bit of a hit this week. That's basically because they have not been able to continue to maintain that high win rate that's required to have such a large gap away from the rest of the factions. And at our current rate of trend, we will see the Starks and Free Folk meet sometime soon, possibly in the next week. I think what's interesting about this set of data, though, to me, is that we see Free Folk and Starks quite significantly ahead of the whole rest of the pack. We'll see whether or not the Baratheons, given enough time, can meet them, can reach them. On their current week's performance, they are trending up to as high as where the Starks currently are. But what's more interesting to me about the relative strength of the Free Folk and the Starks by comparison to the rest of the factions is that these two factions have significantly higher activation count in the majority of the competitive lists that they run. Taking some numbers from the NRG TTS event, which is now in its fourth round, we see that the average Free Folk list runs 8.75 activations. The average Stark list runs 8.85. Whereas all of the factions are effectively in a cluster of around 7 to 7.5 activations. That's why we see them closely packed. We see them very competitive against each other. We see matches going either which way 50% of the time. But the Starks and the Free Folk are just outperforming them now around 60% win ratio. And the real kicker to this is that the Targaryens, now significantly out in last place, they post an average activation count of 6.75. Obviously, activation count has more to it than just more is better. But what we see here is that activation count, when used well, seems to be one of the most important list building mechanics, and is the real driver of the power of the Free Folk and the Starks. With the Starks driving ever upwards through the power rankings and the Baratheons making a huge surge this week, we see some relatively significant occurrences, shall we call them, some significant moments happening in the Commander power rankings. For the first time since effectively the site was launched in January, Harmer has lost top spot as the singular highest ranked commander to Robb Stark. Robb has been the absolute powerhouse behind driving this Stark resurgence, this Stark movement towards the top of these power rankings, and he is the key driver to their strength. A few other commanders have had some success with relative mixed bag of results, and we'll see that some Stark commanders are still holding the faction back. But in general, Robb has remained the most popular picked commander, the most used faction, the most used commander, the highest number of submissions, and it's not surprising to find him now at number 1 spot. What really we have to ask ourselves is Robb more dominant inside the Starks now than Harmer was considered to be inside the Free Folk? And is that an issue for game balance? Does Greywind bring too much on top of the fact that Robb in himself has a strong set of tools and amongst his cards? And is that something that needs to be addressed? Have we gone back to a situation of Jon inside the Night's Watch here? Moving on down this list, we see quite a few significant names in the process of the Baratheon resurgence. Courtney Penrose has taken 4th spot with a very significant rating of 37.5. He has pulled up with him, he has brought with him Renly Lord Paramount with a very significant 29 rating, Axel Florent with 28, and Loras with 26. For there to be 4 commanders of the Baratheons in amongst the top 10 is very significant and shows that the Baratheons can be quite top tier if used in the right ways. What we still continue to see at the absolute other end of this table, though, is Renly Charismatic Heir in last place. And when we look at Renly specifically, we'll see that he has continued to get worse. As we already touched on, Robb is the week's biggest winner, and he has a staggering plus 23 rating from the past 7 days. In that week, he has won 8 of 9 posted games. And significantly, so many of these, almost all of these, are competitive tournament results. This is not casual use of Robb. This is Robb being fielded late into a competition where the players are already matching up against other players who have significant win ratios, and yet he is able to win 88.89% of his games. Okay, only 9 results. But across all results, he has a pretty significant 61% win ratio. Coming in second for the week is Renly Lord Paramount, with a much lower 5 games posted this week. He has managed to win 4 of them, but he has managed to achieve himself a rating change of plus 15. He scores significantly more every time he plays and wins because it is not expected for Baratheons to currently win. They are still power rated as the 6th worst of 7 factions. So he will receive a much bigger swing for having won those games than Robb, who is expected to win those games because the Starks are well rated. Closely behind Renly is Axel Florent. Now, for me, Axel Florent is a brilliant NCU commander. He synergizes incredibly well with the rest of the R'hllor-based keywords, the R'hllor faithful themselves, and The only thing that is holding him back, I think, is the fact that his 3-point NCU option is also a brilliant choice. He has the old Styre conundrum, which is nobody doubts that Styre is a strong commander, but they all question whether or not it's not better to run the Styre NCU version instead. I think that Axel really brings a lot of cards that work off different triggers, work off different mechanics to the rest of the Baratheon deck, and really helps to round them out and give them a lot of offensive damage potential. The question is can you do without his 2 automatic wounds, which is a very key way to kill off those Stark dogs before they've activated. Behind him, we see Davos make a huge surge. He's scored himself plus 12.8 this week. Now, Davos was not selected at all inside of the TTS NRG event. So none of these will be tournament results. But I think that it is a significant oversight because Davos himself provides a whole new dynamic to the Baratheon army and helps cover up so many of their weaknesses. My only problem is that the Baratheons are really struggling to keep their activation count high to be properly competitive. And so I think there is a strong tendency for the Baratheons to lean on an NCU commander for that free pick. As I already mentioned, Renly Charismatic Heir, unlike the Renly Lord Paramount option, is continuing to perform incredibly badly. We see him again for the second week running, the worst performing commander with another minus 22 in rating. This makes him score a minus 91 total overall rating. No commander has, in the history of the site, been rated this bad. I don't know what to say other than I think it's time for people to try a different tact. And I think he might be beyond saving at this point. Last week, I spoke about the fact that Brynden was the lowest ranked Stark commander. And he is the thing that looks to be holding them back from taking number 1 spot. People have been using him in the TTS event, but it has not gone well. He has scored himself a minus 14 points this week. And I think that he, much like Gregor, does not play to the strengths of the faction that he is commanding. And that does not build about consistent wins. He may well be frustrating to play into if you're expecting the Starks to be aggressive and one-dimensional. But I think what he gives up in aggression is not made up for in defense. We see coming in number 3, Weeper from the Free Folk. He has at times been considered the possible second runner as a matchup or a 2-list format pairing with Harmer. But he does not perform well right now, and in the past week he has not managed to win any of the 4 submitted games. Now, on the flip side of the Axel Florent conversation, I personally have been trying to run a Stannis loyalty Baratheon list commanded by Roose, something that I've seen other people kind of propose and plays very well into the Axel Florent NCU and also into the Melisandre NCU. I think that is a very difficult list to play against and does not make a hugely enjoyable game. But what we see here is that it does not translate very well into winning the game. I think that what I had particularly overlooked is that the investment you have now made in those 2 NCUs is not the 8 points you paid for them, because Our real pain here is that the Baratheon deck already struggles to trigger many of its tactics cards. And when we add Roose as a commander, we add 6 commander cards, most of which I have no real intention of using in any significant way. He is only there to provide his 2 additional panic tokens as a replace effect, so that Axel can be more reliably called upon to have a token when an enemy activates to deal those 2 wounds, say bye-bye to the dogs, or for Melisandre to be guaranteed to push through that high damage panic check. And maybe that might seem very disheartening from the opposite side of the table, but it's not often that that is resulting in an actual win, because everybody is overlooking the cost paid into building that list, which is a poor set of commander cards, a poor synergy between the commander himself and the rest of the list, and that's on top of the 8 points you've already spent in NCUs. I think that Axel is the better choice here, or if you want a different dynamic, you should be running Davos. In at 5th place, in the worst losers this week, similar to Gregor, we see a flip reversal of last week's result, which is Grey Worm, who was initially performing very well for the Targaryens and was leading the charge as their best commander. He has had himself a significantly bad week this week. Maybe that initial surge of use did him very well, but people are now learning those mechanics a little more and how to counter them. He has had himself a -11 based off 4 losses, and what's significant here is they were all crushing defeats. That is going to cost you, even if you're already the lowest rated faction. But at plus 4.9, he is probably still the highest rated Targaryen commander right now. That's it for this week. Hope you'll tune in next week and continue to submit all your results at asongoficeandfire-stats.com.